Alright guys, welcome to the ghost town of Fairview, British Columbia. I'm going to share a story with you today that's really entertaining, but it's also got a second purpose to it. It's going to help clarify another local legend about some lost gold bars, so stay tuned for that. So Fairview was a gold mining town, and it boomed through the 1890s to about 1905 or so, and some of the mines did pretty good. One of those mines was the Morning Star mine, and it was owned by three gentlemen. One of the gentlemen was a fellow by the name of Steve Mangott. And Steve was a bit of a character. He used to stop by my great-grandparents' place, and that's where this story originates, conversations with my great-grandparents. Anyways, as one of the three owners of this gold mine, it was Steve's responsibility to either store or sell the gold that they produced. And he would do this by transporting it to a small town to the north, about 40 miles to the north, known as Penticton. And there he would either sell the gold or he would store it at the local government house. They were the only people that had a decent safe back in those days. And you kind of got to remember, this is, the mining towns of Western Canada, they attracted some pretty unsavory characters. So it was kind of the Wild West of Western Canada in a lot of ways. And Steve knew this. And he knew that transporting these gold bars 40 miles north was risky. So he did what he could to mitigate that risk. And he made himself a vest. It's a leather vest, and it would hold 4 gold bars close to his chest. And he'd wear this vest underneath his shirt, so that if he were held up on the trail for whatever reason, there was a good chance that they would take his horse or check his saddlebags, possibly make him empty his pockets, but there was not much of a chance of them asking him to take off his shirt, right? So he figured this was a pretty wise choice. Steve gets up early one morning and he's going to make his monthly trip into Penticton with these gold bars. So he puts on his vest, loads it up with gold, saddles his horse, and grabs his rifle, and away he goes, pre-dawn, right? And he heads north. He heads north across what's now known as Tanner Flats in towards current day Willowbrook. And this is basically the old Fur Brigade trail, so it's a pretty well-established trail. Anyways, he's making his way along. He's approaching a big bull pine tree. Out from behind it steps a man, and he's wearing a mask. And he's got a lever action rifle, and he lowers it right at Steve. Asks Steve to step off his horse. So Steve knows what's about to happen next. He's going to be robbed. Or even worse, he's going to be shot and then robbed. And he's not too keen on either. And he doesn't have much time. He can't really reach for his rifle or anything. But he just makes a split-second decision. And he digs his spurs into his horse and just knocks this guy ass over tea kettle. Runs him right over with his horse. And just keeps on riding. And he rides for several miles. Until he's out into what's now known as the White Lake Basin. Big open basin. And he gets out into the middle of that where he knows nobody can pick him off with a rifle. He rests his horse for a little bit, probably had a cigarette, and then he carried on to Penticton. No reason to turn back, right? He had thwarted the would-be robber. So he gets into Penticton, he either deposits his gold or sells his gold. Probably spent the night and made his way back to Fairview the next day and back to the mine. And he would have told this story, and I'm sure his fellow partners would have held him in a pretty high regard for looking after their interests as much as his own, right? And I'm sure this story was told over and over and over again. Small towns back in those days, not much for entertainment. And this would have been a heck of a story to tell, right? Surviving being held up by just running the guy over with a horse. Pretty entertaining. But that's not where our story ends. Fast forward about 12, 15 years. Not sure the exact date. But Steve's got family in New York. and he's heading there on a train. He's eastbound somewhere in the United States. And he strikes up a conversation with another passenger on this train. They get to talking, and introductions are made, and, you know, the usual, right? The guy kind of pauses, and he goes, "Are you the same Steve Mangott from Fairview, British Columbia?" Steve's kind of stunned, and, you know, how does this guy know who I am, right? Steve just kind of nods his head. "Yeah, that's me." There's a bit of a silence. Another passenger speaks up again. He says, "Are you the same guy that ran that fellow over during that robbery? The horse? Just knocked him over?" Then it kind of dawns on Steve, you know, this story has probably made its way far and wide. You know, Steve's fairly reserved. Yeah, that was me. Yeah. And doesn't want to draw a lot of attention to himself, right? Well, the guy across the aisle, he just kind of smiled. He said, "Well, that was me and my partner that tried to hold you up. I'm sure you could have heard a pin drop on that train." And Steve just sat back and listened to the guy tell his side of the story. And it went something like this. So he and his partner had picked a spot on the trail that would work well for the robbery. They knew Steve was coming. And he held the horses just up the hillside a little ways while his partner went down to greet Steve with a rifle. And he said that by the time his partner made it back to the horses, he was pretty upset. And he was going to go after Steve. And he directed this gentleman that he was to wait on the trail. And if Steve were to come back, you know, he was to shoot him. And he explained that he was pretty happy that Steve didn't come back because he really didn't want to shoot anybody. You know, I guess Steve just kind of let bygones be bygones. You know, time had passed, and, you know, now he had an even more entertaining story to tell, to add to his original story, right? Part 2, if you will. So how does this relate to the legend of the lost gold bars? Well, it's pretty simple. There's another local legend called the Lost Gold Bars of Camp McKinney. And in that story, a gentleman robs a stagecoach of gold bars and then stashes them for safekeeping. And he returns a year later to pick up his gold bars. And evidently he was shot before he could. And when they checked the body, they found that he was wearing a leather vest underneath his shirt. And it was designed to hold gold bars. So you can see where perhaps these two stories have crossed paths over time. So the leather vest was related to the Steve Mangott story, not to the gold bars at Camp McKinney. Like I said, this is a family story. And I'm going to put a short clip up of Grandad telling the story best as he could in his early 90s. Cheers, guys.
Steve was dead to the post. And he said, in our living room, and of course, my dad had to yell again here. Right. So I said, I heard a lot of stories. Steve took a lot of gold that morning ceremony. They had there was a stamp mill or ball mill, probably a ball mill. And they were able to pan out the gold and melt it down into bars. And he had a vest made to hold the bars. And he'd take off some night. One day he was going back to New York and got talking to the fellow on this train. He said, "Are you Steve Mangott?" Yeah. Said, "Do you remember one night a fella held you up and in the dark, you know, it was timber, and Steve never hesitated. He jabbed the spurs in the horse and jumped right on the top of the scout back and just run him right over. And he got kicked out of the way. Steve said, I never stopped running until I was way out in the open and kept watching back. Nobody followed. He said, if you had turned around and come back, I was to shoot you.
Wow.
Tough place.
No doubt.
You know, gold is gold.
Yeah. Or somebody else might, we'll just take it.
Yeah, at that time, $14 an ounce or whatever.
Yeah. So Steve normally took the gold somewhere else? Is that what he was doing? Was taking the gold somewhere?
Steve, he was taking the cash in
Oh,
the government office.
right. Commissioner or whatever. That's pretty neat.
And his partner ended up with all. And lived out his days there in Milan.
Huh.
And Steve used to sometimes borrow a horse from my dad and ride over the Fairview. Visiting there.
Right?
Wild days.